The morning in Washington began with a tension that had been building for weeks, as lawmakers returned to the Capitol to confront the deadlocked emergency spending bill that had dominated political conversations across the country. The corridors were filled with aides carrying thick folders of budget analyses, intelligence assessments, and proposed amendments that had already triggered heated debates. Both parties understood that the bill was more than a routine legislative package, it was a test of political willpower, national priorities, and the fragile balance between domestic needs and foreign commitments. Reporters outside the Capitol captured the growing frustration of voters, many of whom felt that politicians were spending more time fighting each other than solving the problems that most Americans cared about. Inside committee rooms, negotiations progressed slowly. Members of Congress debated the funding allocated to border security, especially the proposed modernization of surveillance systems along the southern border. Some lawmakers insisted that enhanced technology and staffing were essential to national security, while others argued that the budget favored enforcement over humanitarian protocols. At the same time, the section of the bill addressing artificial intelligence oversight drew intense scrutiny. The rapid advancement of AI throughout 2025 had raised concerns about privacy, employment disruption, and national security. Regulators warned that the government needed clearer rules to prevent abuses, but technology companies lobbied intensely for flexibility and innovation-friendly policies. A quieter but equally important part of the bill focused on foreign aid for key allies in Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. Diplomats emphasized that geopolitical uncertainty was growing worldwide and that the United States needed to demonstrate reliability to its partners. Yet critics claimed that foreign spending should come second to domestic struggles, pointing to rising living costs, infrastructure shortcomings, and a healthcare system under strain. This internal conflict mirrored a broader sentiment captured in the latest nationwide poll, which revealed a deep voter divide. Many Americans expressed skepticism about Washington's decisions, saying they felt increasingly disconnected from the political establishment. By midday, the atmosphere outside the Capitol had shifted as financial markets reacted to new economic data. Slower than expected inflation numbers brought cautious optimism, with analysts interpreting the news as a sign that price hikes were beginning to stabilize after years of volatility. Investors responded swiftly, sending tech stocks soaring and injecting energy into Wall Street. Yet the mixed market performance reflected broader economic uncertainties. Manufacturing sectors experienced downturns due to global supply chain fluctuations, and energy companies adjusted strategies following unpredictable shifts in oil demand. Federal Reserve officials maintained their stance that interest rate decisions would remain tied to long-term inflation patterns, a message intended to reassure markets but one that also hinted at the complexity of the months ahead. As the day continued, Americans across the country watched the unfolding political and economic developments with a mixture of hope and concern. Some saw the spending bill as an opportunity for the country to strengthen its position technologically, economically, and diplomatically. Others viewed it as another example of government overreach or misaligned priorities. The story of the day was not only about policies but about the struggle to define what direction the nation should take in an increasingly unpredictable world. And in the midst of this uncertainty, everyday people, workers, parents, students, small business owners, waited for clarity about how the decisions in Washington would truly affect their lives across the world. International headlines painted a picture of a globe grappling with conflicts, negotiations, and the shifting balance of power. In the Middle East, tensions rose overnight as new clashes erupted along contested lines, disrupting fragile ceasefire efforts that diplomats had been working to uphold. Humanitarian organizations warned that aid distribution was becoming increasingly difficult due to damaged infrastructure and ongoing security risks. Volunteers described chaotic scenes in affected regions, where families searched for medical help and temporary shelters. Even as convoys attempted to deliver food, water, and essential supplies, bureaucratic delays and unpredictable violence hindered their efforts. These struggles brought renewed urgency to the diplomatic meetings being held in European capitals, where representatives from multiple nations attempted, once again, to find a path forward that could reduce hostilities. Meanwhile, in Brussels, NATO leaders gathered to discuss long-term defense strategies. The alliance had spent much of the year facing new kinds of threats, not only traditional military challenges but cyberattacks capable of crippling communication systems and critical infrastructure. Military officials shared intelligence reports describing increasingly sophisticated drone technologies circulating among both state and non-state actors. This shift in global warfare demanded rapid adaptation, prompting several member states to signal upcoming increases in defense spending. The summit rooms buzzed with discussions about joint training programs, enhanced intelligence sharing, and modernization of air defense capabilities. Yet behind the formal speeches lay a growing anxiety. Global stability was becoming harder to predict, and NATO's role had never felt more essential, or more complicated. Thousands of miles away, economic news from Asia offered a stark contrast. In Beijing, government officials announced new incentives aimed at revitalizing the manufacturing sector, intending to strengthen supply chains and attract foreign investment. Analysts said the move reflected China's strategic goal of reinforcing its position in the global economy amid competition with the United States and shifting global trade patterns. In Tokyo, the mood was similarly optimistic, as Japan reported a noteworthy rise in exports. The increase was attributed to both technology shipments and a rebound in automotive production, signaling that the nation's post-pandemic economic recovery was gaining momentum. Investors in the region responded with confidence, boosting markets and contributing to a wave of optimism that contrasted sharply with the political tensions dominating Western headlines. Beyond geopolitics and economics, concerns about climate change added another layer of urgency to the global narrative. A newly released scientific report warned that the world was on track to exceed critical temperature thresholds by 2035 unless emissions were dramatically reduced. Environmental groups urged governments to take the report seriously ahead of an upcoming climate summit scheduled for next month. Several countries were preparing to unveil new commitments on renewable energy, carbon reduction, and international cooperation, but many activists expressed doubts about whether promises would translate into meaningful action. Health officials in the United States and abroad also issued warnings as seasonal flu cases rose earlier than expected. The CDC emphasized the importance of vaccination, noting that while the year's strain appeared more contagious, early treatment remained effective. Clinics across multiple states saw increased activity as families sought preventive care, hoping to avoid outbreaks like those seen in previous years. As evening settled worldwide, the interconnectedness of global events became increasingly clear. Military tensions influenced markets, economic shifts affected diplomatic strategies, and climate warnings underscored the fragility of human systems everywhere. In a world where a single headline could ripple across continents within minutes, the importance of cooperation, stability, and informed leadership had never been greater. And yet, as each nation confronted its own challenges, the path toward collective progress remained uncertain, shaped by decisions made today and their consequences for years to come. In Silicon Valley, the energy of innovation pulsed through corporate campuses and research labs as technology companies ushered in a new wave of artificial intelligence systems. Engineers, policymakers, and business leaders were caught in a rapid race to shape the future, and the pace of development throughout 2025 had exceeded even the most ambitious forecasts. Inside one bustling tech headquarters, teams demonstrated prototypes of AI tools designed for government agencies, schools, and major corporations. These tools promised enhanced productivity, faster decision-making, and unprecedented automation. Yet behind the excitement lay a simmering debate over responsibility, ethics, and national security. As advancements accelerated, so did concerns about misuse, data privacy, and the long-term impact on employment. Regulators in Washington were watching closely. After months of hearings, expert testimony, and closed-door meetings, federal agencies prepared to unveil updated guidelines meant to safeguard against harmful applications of AI. The draft proposal circulating among policymakers called for stricter oversight of deepfake technologies, mandatory transparency standards for algorithms used in public sectors, and enhanced penalties for companies that failed to comply with data protection rules. Tech lobbyists, aware of the possible ramifications, mounted an aggressive push for more flexible regulations. They argued that too many restrictions could hinder innovation and weaken America's competitive edge against rival nations developing their own advanced AI capabilities. Outside the corporate world, regular citizens grappled with the sudden transformation of everyday life. Schools tested AI-driven tutoring programs capable of adjusting lesson plans in real time based on a student's performance. Hospitals adopted predictive diagnostic systems that analyzed symptoms, medical histories, and population-level data to recommend treatments with remarkable accuracy. Even small businesses, from local grocery stores to auto repair shops, began using AI assistants to manage inventory, schedule appointments, and streamline customer service operations. Many Americans welcomed these conveniences, but others feared that too much reliance on automation would threaten jobs, weaken human judgment, or deepen inequalities between communities with access to advanced technology and those without. The national conversation reached a new pitch when a widely shared investigative report revealed vulnerabilities in several AI systems used for public safety. Researchers demonstrated that certain algorithms exhibited significant biases, misinterpreting facial data or misjudging risk assessments based on flawed training inputs. Civil rights organizations demanded immediate government action, insisting that lives could be put at risk if mistakes went unaddressed. The revelation triggered widespread concern, prompting cities to temporarily suspend certain AI-powered systems until independent reviews could be completed. Technology companies responded by announcing transparency initiatives, promising better testing procedures and inviting outside experts to audit their models. Amid these tensions, international competitors took notice. Government officials warned that foreign adversaries were exploring ways to exploit vulnerabilities in American AI systems, potentially gaining access to sensitive information or manipulating critical infrastructure. Intelligence agencies reported increased cyber probing from overseas actors targeting research databases, cloud platforms, and government networks. These threats added urgency to ongoing legislative debates, stressing the importance of securing technological systems before hostile forces could take advantage. Despite challenges, optimism persisted in many corners of the industry. Developers pointed to breakthroughs in clean energy optimization, disaster response coordination, and scientific research made possible through advanced AI modeling. These innovations, they argued, represented the true potential of artificial intelligence, improving life on a global scale, provided safeguards were strong and ethical standards remained central. By the end of the week, the nation found itself at a crossroads, torn between excitement and apprehension. The future of AI in America would depend not only on engineers and lawmakers but on the willingness of society to navigate the balance between innovation and responsibility. The story unfolding did not belong to a single company or government agency, it belonged to the millions of people whose lives would be shaped by decisions made now, at the dawn of a technological era unlike any before. Climate scientists, political leaders, and environmental activists braced for a turning point as a major climate summit approached, and a newly released report intensified global discussions. The report, authored by a coalition of international researchers, projected that global temperatures were on track to exceed critical thresholds within a decade if emissions were not drastically curtailed. Governments across the world reacted with urgency, and diplomatic channels hummed with activity as countries prepared new commitments ahead of the summit. The findings were alarming, detailing accelerated ice melt, rising sea levels, and more frequent extreme weather events that threatened millions of lives and billions of dollars in infrastructure. In coastal communities, residents were already living with the consequences. Along vulnerable shorelines in the United States, homeowners described watching tides creep closer each year, eroding beaches and damaging homes. Fishermen reported shifting marine patterns as warming waters altered migration routes. Towns in Florida, Louisiana, and the Carolinas held emergency meetings to discuss flood defenses, insurance premiums, and the cost of reinforcing aging infrastructure. These local struggles reflected a broader global trend, with countries from Southeast Asia to Western Europe grappling with floods, droughts, and unexpected temperature fluctuations. World leaders, however, faced an uphill battle. The climate summit promised ambitious goals: accelerated transition to renewable energy, sweeping cuts to carbon emissions, expanded international funding for developing nations, and global cooperation on sustainable technologies. Yet disagreements persisted behind closed doors. Some nations insisted that wealthier industrialized countries should shoulder a greater share of the economic burden, citing historical emissions. Others argued that strict regulations could slow their economic growth and jeopardize national stability. Energy-producing nations expressed concern that rapid changes might disrupt global markets, affecting millions of jobs tied to oil, gas, and mining industries. At the same time, environmental organizations warned that political delays could prove disastrous. Activists staged demonstrations in several major cities, urging governments to commit to binding emissions targets. Young protesters carried signs calling for accountability and long-term responsibility, emphasizing that the consequences of climate inaction would affect future generations most profoundly. Social media amplified these messages, sparking debates about whether current political structures were capable of addressing a crisis of such magnitude. In the scientific community, researchers continued to highlight promising solutions. Advances in solar and wind technology had made renewable energy more affordable than ever before. Breakthroughs in battery storage, carbon capture systems, and climate resilient agriculture provided hope for a more sustainable future. Corporations, facing rising pressure from consumers and shareholders, began adopting greener practices, investing in energy efficient production methods, and committing to long term sustainability goals. Some cities unveiled ambitious projects, such as electric public transportation systems, smart grid infrastructure, and urban reforestation initiatives that aimed to reduce heat and improve air quality. Still, the transition remained uneven. Rural areas struggled to finance clean energy installations, and developing nations sought greater international support to avoid widening economic gaps during the global shift away from fossil fuels. The United States, balancing its domestic political divisions, prepared to announce a new climate initiative that included renewable investments, incentives for green technology, and expanded collaboration with private industry. Yet lawmakers continued to debate the cost, the implementation timeline, and the potential impact on traditional energy sectors. As the climate summit drew nearer, the world watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The decisions made in upcoming meetings would influence environmental policy for decades, shaping the future of cities, ecosystems, and entire nations. The atmosphere was tense, but also charged with possibility. For many, the question was no longer whether the world could change course, but whether it would. The urgency of the moment left little room for hesitation, and the next steps taken by global leaders would determine the fate of a planet that stood at the edge of profound and irreversible change.